Global Muchidão, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Berlin.
Hello, everyone. Just doing a quick sound check to make sure that people hear. Do you hear? Okay. Good afternoon and also good evening to those who are joining us online from Germany. I would like to warmly welcome you to this side event, which is organized by German Watch, CARE Germany, and Brut für die Welt. We would also like to thank the German Pavilion for hosting us today and for providing us with the opportunity to come together. I'm Lina Adil. I work as a policy advisor for climate finance at German Watch, and I'll be your host / moderator for this event. So this event will focus on ways forward for addressing loss and damage. It will be divided into two parts. The first part, we will have a keynote speaker who will be joining online. And then we will have a panel of great individuals who will share more about solutions and also ways forward for addressing loss and damage at COP30 and beyond. As you have seen, loss and damage is not now on the highest priority at this COP. It's not very sparkly as it was in Dubai or in Egypt before. But at the same time, climate impacts are not stopping. We have seen Hurricane Melissa in Jamaica, which was a Category 5 storm. And attribution science has confirmed that the hurricane has become more intense because of climate-induced climate change. At the same time, just last week, we have had in the Philippines Typhoon Fongguang, which was also very devastating as well. And also, it's not about typhoons and storms, but also droughts are becoming more and more severe, especially in East Africa and Southeast Asia, in what the OECD describes as the most widespread and damaging years in record from 2023 to 2025. And now, also zooming out a bit, this year we have had a groundbreaking moment from the International Court of Justice, where they have confirmed and clarified that responding to loss and damage is not charity, it's a legal obligation. But at the same time, the different instruments responding to loss and damage are suffering. As we're speaking now, the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage is having its first call for proposals. The first phase is being launched with a volume of 250 millions. But at the same time, the needs equate to 250 billion per year. So I think this is just a fraction of what is actually needed. In this space, as we're here, loss and damage also risks falling off the negotiation agenda. We have the Warsaw International Mechanism Review, which is now in its third round, also reflecting a real political deadlock. After the WIM review, we might be in a place where there is no dedicated agenda, negotiation agenda for loss and damage at all, which would be quite catastrophic, I think. So in this session, to wrap up this very long introduction, we would like to have a discussion and also to keep it alive, where we think it's not very much alive in the formal negotiations. So we want to bring together experts and and people who have been long engaged in loss and damage in different themes, such as human mobility, financial protection, and also national response systems, to have a conversation together on what needs to happen here at COP and also beyond. With this, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, and unfortunately, she's not here with us today, and I think we're having some technical issues, so she cannot be online, but we have a recording. And to introduce this keynote speaker, her name is Dr. Kira Winke, who's the head of the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy at the German Council on Foreign Relations. She's a leading expert on climate change, migration, and foreign policy. She has advised the German government on crisis prevention, peace building, and has previously worked at the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impacts and Research. Thank you so much, Dr. Kira, if you're hearing us. And now I give the signal to play the recording.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to have this online input today. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you because my flight was canceled and I will only arrive tomorrow in Berlin. But it's really great that I could give this input online virtually. My name is Kira Finke and I head the Center for Climate and Foreign Policy at the German Council on Foreign Relations. Now I will start my presentation. I hope all of you can see it clearly. I will talk today about the rising losses and damaged security that we're currently facing because of the severe consequences of climate change. In my talk, I want to cover three aspects. One is the current situation of losses and damages. It's intertwining with security aspects, and then also the question of overshoot and its implications for future losses and damages. What we are witnessing at the moment is that extreme weather events are becoming more frequent and more intense. Strong tropical cyclone activity, for example, in the Philippines has displaced millions of people and created large losses and damages. Also in the Caribbean, we saw this year Hurricane Melissa, which really tested the limits of adaptation in Jamaica and eastern Cuba with its very strong winds, made stronger even by the climate crisis so far. So we are seeing that while not all extreme weather events are attributable to climate change, we are seeing that these extreme events are becoming more frequent and more intense, and they're causing rising economic damages and losses. How strong these losses are, you can see here. You can see here in this graph on the left-hand side that we have a 10-year average of 242 billion US dollars of economic losses. And you can also see that 2024, the numbers were much higher. We had 318 billion economic losses. And you can see also that less than half of those are insured. So the insurance coverage is extremely unequal, and the majority of losses are not insured. If you look at economic losses and the sheer volume of it, it's also important that in poor communities, any losses can have very disproportionate adverse effects. So if you see also some smaller numbers of economic losses, but they're affecting, for example, communities where infrastructure wasn't good to begin with, we see that also, of course, these losses and damages have very strong adverse effects. But of course, financial assistance or an insurance payout after an extreme weather event cannot alleviate rising non-economic losses and damages, such as destroyed cultural heritage, severed social bonds, or healthy life years lost. So it's important to look at both economic and non-economic losses and damages, as these are occurring at very strong intensity at the moment because of this increased intensity and frequency of extreme weather events. If we look at last year's numbers of displacement, we are seeing that here we see a confluence of non-economic and economic losses as displayed by the displacement numbers. So 70% of global internal displacements in 2024 were due to disasters. So it's a staggering number of 45.8 million new internal displacements by disasters, and the majority of those are weather-related disasters. As you can see below, most of them are due to storms and also floods. And so we are seeing that when people are being displaced, perhaps because their homes are destroyed, perhaps because of the salinization of soils and the agricultural land is no longer usable in the future, this means that people are facing both economic and non-economic losses and damages. If we look into the future, and this question also connected to displacement, is the question of habitability. And habitability is, of course, defined for once in the context of climate change by this, how strong will the climate impacts be? So how strong is the frequency and intensity of the impact, but also how resilient are we? How strong are our technological, societal, or financial capacities to respond to these pressures on habitability? If we look at the current observational data from the past couple of years, we are witnessing that we will most likely overshoot the lower boundary of the Paris Agreement, of the temperature limit of the Paris Agreement, meaning the 1.5-degree limit will probably be overshot. And this will create temporary and permanent additional pressures on habitability. And these uncertainties around the future return to lower warming levels, so this sort of bending back down after a potential overshoot, could inhibit investments that strengthen resilience and that could help to adapt to avoid losses and damages. There is a very common narration of the overshoot justification, for example, that prolonged fossil fuel burning is a means of human development and prosperity. But however, in reality, these development gains are highly unequal, and the bulk of emissions is for convenience and luxury.
Hello? No? Yeah, I'm back. Hi, everyone. And apologies for this. I think it was quite a valuable presentation, but hopefully Dr. Kira can still join us online and make some of the points towards the end. But what really captured my attention was the last point that usually it's not the people who are most vulnerable who get to benefit from overshooting or from continuing burning fossil fuels. And anyway, thanks a lot, Dr. Kira. And if you have any questions, please save them. We will have some time later. And now I would like to move on to the panel discussion. We have 4 speakers. 3 are here with us, and 1 who will be joining us online. For our first speaker, we have Saqib Hug, who's a Managing Director of International Center for Climate Change and Development in Bangladesh. Please join me. Then we have Adrian Martinez Blanco, who's the founder and director of La Ruta del Clima. And last but not least, we have Marlene Achoki, who's a global policy lead for climate and resilience with CARE International. And joining us online as well, hi, Katharina. I see you. Dr. Katharina Brown, who's a policy advisor on migration, human rights, and climate-induced displacement. And she works with North German Lutheran Church. Thank you all for joining us. Very happy to be having this conversation with you. And to start off, I'd like to start with you, Adrian, to give us some scene setting of what we are to expect at COP30. And my question to you is, what would a successful COP30 outcome on loss and damage look like? And what barriers remain to operationalizing the fund for responding to loss and damage, and also the Santiago network? You have to open it.
Hi. Hi. Okay. Hi. Good afternoon. Thank you for the space. I think we could narrow down this conversation in a very UNFCCC style, and we could just focus on the BIM and Barbados implementation mechanism and say, oh, yeah, well, it's giving money very soon. Right now, it's actually making an announcement, and you could go and get your 5 to 20 million, and they're spending half the money that they got pledged. But if we look back more into what is the law, and what are we talking about what is loss and damage? Loss and damage is, to me, an economic issue, an illicit issue. It's about international wrongful act. It's about the negative externalities of carbon-intensive economies. It's about the lack of responsibility for not being responsible for the climate debt that some economies have. And it also has a lot to do with why the UNFCCC is going up 0.5, that is not the bottom goal, it's the legal limit according to the court, to the ICJ and to the Inter-American Court. So if that's real, then we have to think back on what are we seeing here and what we have now. And I think with the advisory opinions, we have a very different landscape. It is not enough to talk about the Barbados implementation mechanism. It is not enough to talk about what the WIM has been for so many years. It is what is the legal obligation of countries as the minimum, as the platform or legal basis for making climate governance decisions. And what climate governance decisions for loss and damage do not meet that threshold. And I think there's many. For example, while we have the loss and damage fund, we know because the Secretary General report said it a long time ago that the money allocated for it, it doesn't even cover a fraction of what is needed yearly, because even though it was given money like 2 years ago, it has not been replenished. It hasn't even been, the pledges that have been given, half of them have not been allocated to the fund. The fund has been developed into this implementation mechanism in a way that is not opening for communities to access directly. And most importantly, it does not conform with its structure, as the courts, the Inter-American courts has also recognized. It's not built to protect human rights, and it's not built to fulfill international law obligations regarding loss and damage. So if we know that, maybe we should go back to where loss and damage discussions began, which usually it's in Article 4.8 of the UNFCCC, of how can we now, knowing what are our legal responsibilities, knowing that after 30 years emissions have not been stabilized, knowing that we have trillions of dollars of loss and damage because our economies have not internalized the negative externalities and have made profit of damaging the climate system, maybe we should then develop what many countries, especially from the Pacific, said in the beginning. We need mechanisms for reparations, for responsibility, obligation-based mechanisms, because now that we have the BIM, we don't know if in 2027 we'll even have, again, a fraction of the funding that is needed. So does that ensure the rule of law? It does not. Does it enable our economies to be structurally transformed in taking account the negative externalities of destroying people and planet? It does not. So now we have the opportunity in this COP to check what the ICJ said, to check what the Inter-American Court of Human Rights said, to check what the African court will say eventually in the consultative opinion, and to make transformational changes in our governance. Because if not, I probably won't see you, but somebody will be here 30 years from now when we're 4 to 6 degrees saying that, well, we still have not decreased emissions because the negative externalities have never budgeted into the economy. And this is what loss and damage reparation does. Closes a loop of consumption and production. The loss and damage fund and all the mechanisms that are not obligation-based, that do not conform to international law and human rights law, do not close that loop. They make an economy based on unlimited resources, which we do not have. And as a Central American that works with communities doing research, I know that it is their right not to be harmed. It is their right for harm to be ceased. It is their right for restitution to happen. It is their right for compensation. And those are international obligations, and those are human rights. And that is the future for loss and damage, despite whatever all the climate nerds say and whatever party-driven processes. Now we're not just asking, we're demanding our rights and their legal obligations to negotiate under legal obligations in the UNFCCC. Thank you.
You can just. Thank you very much, Adrian, for giving us such a bigger picture and also connecting the loss and damage conversation to where it actually started and where we're heading now. And I think I very much agree with you that it's about reparations, it's about restitution, it's about making polluters really pay. And as you mentioned, the fund is going into becoming a mechanism that is not particularly open for all, and nor does it have the volume to respond to all of the needs for loss and damage. So thank you very much for that intervention. And now we will head to Dr. Katerina, and she will give us more thematic focused input on human mobility and migration. And my question to you is, from your work, what lessons can we draw about supporting people who are on the move due to climate impacts? Over to you.
Sorry. Yeah. Is it working? Do you hear me? So first of all, I want to thank Kira, Finke, and Adrian for that important insights. And I think that we have to see this whole picture when we talk about human mobility, and when we talk about all the advisory opinion, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Those are so important issues right now, and so important points right now, because those are entry points for human rights perspective. And we are, I would say, really, so when we talk about migration, human mobility, planned relocation, displacement, forced displacement, and refugees, we can say, yes, we have kind of improvement. Yeah, they are recognized under the new collective quantified goal. They are included. We do have it in the Paris Agreement. They are also mentioned in the within the fund responding loss and damage. And this is really important because we have heard a lot now from Kira, but when we talk about numbers, what are the numbers? Yeah, we talk about 30 million displaced, internally displaced a year. But when we also saw that numbers that 75% of disaster-related displacement occurs in countries that are highly exposed to climate risk, and many of them also fragile or conflict affected. And to understand that climate crisis is really a threat multiplier and it exacerbates humanitarian crisis. This is important to talk about when we talk about human mobility and loss and damage. So human mobility driven by climate impacts takes diverse forms, and this is also important to understand. Sudden evacuations, long-term internal displacement, seasonal or circular labor migration, permanent cross-border relocation, and also planned relocation processes. Each form brings different vulnerabilities depending on legal status, social protection, and access to rights. Undocumented migrants, for example, when they are displaced, internally displaced persons and refugees face discrimination, exploitation, and gender-based violence. So while host communities themselves living in climate risk areas And this leads to face a rising pressure on land and water and services. And we have here really conflictive dynamics. And therefore, we need really context-specific, locally led responses with affected people actively participating in the design of solutions to ensure that mobility is safe, dignified, and sustainable. And loss and damage in this context are both economic and non-economic. And I always have to highlight this, that human mobility or migration and displacement is a form of loss and damage itself, but it also is a form to survive. So it also is a form of preventing more loss and damage. So we do have the destruction of homes, assets, crops. These are visible quantifiable impacts, but what do we do with non-economic losses? And what does this mean in the context of human mobility? Declining health, disrupted education, the breakdown of families and communities, and the erosion of cultural identity and social cohesion. So we have this loss of human rights and access to social protection, leaving people vulnerable to exploitation, violence, racism, and conflict with host communities. So together, all those losses undermine the basic conditions of safety, of dignity, and equality. And if we look now, what do we need for embedding human mobility in the loss and damage architecture, which is really now evolving, and it is really important and there I won't repeat what Adrian already mentioned, but we need a human right-based, a people-centered and an equity-driven approach to loss and damage. And there we need to see mobility also, all those different forms of mobility, as a structural dimension of climate risk that demands coherent policy, technical support, and finance, because we need to have this at the core. Understand that the displacement is really such a reality. So we need it also embedded as a core element of the Warsaw International Mechanism through its third review, leveraging the task force on displacement experiences. What we do have now is a whole set of really, really good products, that knowledge products that the task force on displacement has produced. At the same time, there's a lack of different languages, so people do not have access to all that information. So we really need much more guidance, mobility-related guidance into national policies, but also to communities. Communities need this. So for the fund, what is really important now, of course, we need the fund remains largely empty. So this is filling the fund is just like the most urgent thing. And we can talk about a lot of things what we need in the context of human mobility. But if the fund is empty, it's just like really, we can discuss it for years, and we can say how severe the situation is. But we need also, and this is where we have to push really forward, is a rapid disbursement procedures, direct community access to small grants. And there we really need to see in these frameworks how migrants, how internally displaced people can have this access. We need meaningful participation, and there we also need proposals that should be publicly available. So, and the other thing, and I will finish with that, is that in all that growing architecture, we need coherence and complementarity. Because especially when it comes to migrants and to displaced people, what we see is that we have the WIM, XCOM, we have the Santiago network, we have the fund responding loss and damage, and we have funding arrangement, and then we have far more funding arrangement from UNHCR. And what we need is coherence. We need also really data, disaggregated data, to understand what are the specific needs. And also here, the loss and damage gap report with really the inclusion of local knowledge is so important. Loss and damage finance must deliver protection, not promises, and it must reach migrants, displaced people, and refugees and host communities quickly, directly, and transparently, while ensuring meaningful participation in every decision that affects them. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Catherine. That was quite a comprehensive input. And also thank you for making the point that, especially in human mobility, there are different stages or phases, and different communities can have different needs, from evacuation to planned relocation, and it could be just different for every group that is out there. So thank you very much. And now I would like to turn to Marlene, also to connect all of this conversation to all of the finance solutions that are out there. So my question to you is, how can financial and social protection systems be made truly inclusive and context specific so that they actually protect the most vulnerable groups?
Thank you, Lena. And just picking up from what Katrina said and my previous speakers, loss and damage both adds additional costs, such as when communities have to move, to safer places, medical bills that they need to take care of, caused by the impact of loss and damage and extreme climate change events. And also, it reduces available income because loss of livelihoods, loss of farm produce, loss of health problems because of the people working in, in the different sectors, which makes labor impossible. In many cases of affected communities, most of the time during this situation, they are left to take care of themselves. We do not have solutions already on ground to help communities build back better to, to their former lives. And this is why we talk about aspects around social protection, for example. And of course, before even we get to that, I think the issue of the ICJ on reparations is very key for us to keep, reiterating around. It's important for communities to be reparated when these issues come up, and this should be able to be available on time when these events occur, and do not take a lot of time for them to be able to be supported or, evacuated, or help them to build back to their lives. And we have seen some of these challenges in most of the communities where we've worked as CARE and our partners, where it takes about 3 years, 4 years after a hurricane, extreme flood events in Malawi, Bangladesh, and other many countries. And communities really, even when we go to support this, they say, I wish you came in when it was a week after the event and not maybe 2, 3 years when the occurrence has already taken place. So the aim must be to cover the urgent needs and prevent people from slipping into downward debt spiral, which is hard to escape over time. And so one way is adaptive social protection, which scales up or expands existing social protection. What's very important, even when developing these programs, it's very important to ensure locally led approaches are taken into consideration, and ensure that the women, the girls' needs are also taken into consideration when developing such kind of programs, to ensure that they are not left behind, but also their needs are well captured when developing such kind of programs. The social protection helps to create a buffer, mostly, of course, during the general protection or relocation after some of these events. Another example that I would like also to share in terms of social protection is the insurance, basically. But this should be able to cover maybe the middle income communities, but also the business people, to help them protect themselves from the impacts of climate change. And for the vulnerable communities, this is where we encourage social protections, because they cannot be able to cover their own premiums. And some of these conversations are actually going on in different countries in terms of disaster risk financing, on how do we involve the different key stakeholders, the civil society especially, who are always close to the communities, and try and develop, community-led solutions that would help our vulnerable communities, build back after extreme events of loss and damage. And some of this work, we are doing them in six African countries and to the Caribbean, whereby some of these multi-actor partnership programs are taking place. And there are a lot of innovative discussions on how communities can be able to build back in terms of the different contexts or problems or crises that they face that, puts them in a situation whereby they have lost their lives, they have lost their livelihood, they have lost their resources, they have lost their culture, the non-economic and all the economic losses that our first speaker was talking about. And so these are some of the innovations that the communities and people around the stakeholders are talking about, that we intend to, scale this and implement some of these solutions to ensure that the loss and damage locally led solutions are actually speaking to the real needs, and also the resources are able to be provided real time to help communities be able to adjust and build their resilience to the impacts of climate change. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marlene. I think quite I think a balanced input where you showed us that it's not one solution that is a silver bullet. I think in many places we hear that social protection is the way to go, or insurance is the way to go, or this way is the way to go. But I think to each solution is its context and its group where it can work. And for others, it might not work. So thank you so much for making that distinction and for the input. Now, looking more into the national level and how governments and civil society engage in designing national systems to respond to loss and damage. I turn to Saqib, and I would like you to tell us, what does Bangladesh experience teach us about building national systems for loss and damage, which are both locally relevant and globally relevant as well?
Thank you, Lena, and thank you to the panelists and the speakers in the keynote before me for setting a very elaborate but eloquent the scene on the theme that we're talking about here today. And one of the things that I would like us to sort of zoom down in on this, as you mentioned, is looking at the national level, but then going deeper into the local level. Because what you're really going to be seeing in terms of addressing the impacts of loss and damage is going to be felt at the local level. It's going to accumulate at the national, it's going to accumulate at the regional, but it's actually going to be impacts that are felt by individuals, households, community members, local councillors, district officials. These are where these impacts are going to have to be dealt with. The addressing needs to be down to that level. And right now, as we've heard from quite a lot of what's happening at this macro level in the global scale, it doesn't get there. It barely makes it to the national level, if at best. And even if it does, the resources that are getting there are very, very meager and not to the scale that we need. So in response to that, what we were very fortunate to do, so I'm from Bangladesh, where we work as a think tank with a number of CSO organizations as well as with the government, where the issue of loss and damage right after the Warsaw International Mechanism was set up was seen as something that needs to be addressing immediately. This was before, I remind you, this is before the Santiago Network for Technical Support on Loss and Damage was set up, way before the fund was even conceptualized or even agreed upon as a decision here at the COP. But it was just a review of the WIM mechanism. What would it do in terms of understanding the impacts of loss and damage? As a framework, as a policy, understanding the research, seeing where the impacts are likely to happen. Even though civil society has been telling you for decades, these are impacts that we're facing right now. There's no other research needed at this point because the impacts are being lived. We're looking at impacts, as we saw in the slides just before, about the cyclones, the devastation, the evacuation of communities, the devastation of livelihoods. Those have been happening for decades. So when the review, when the Warsaw International Mechanism was set up as a sort of research and scoping and policy arm, one of the things that we took back as a national effort was to see what happens from these different policies and strategies. How do you get something tangible? How do you get something that will actually act on the ground as a national response, regardless of what happens at the global level? You can wait for all the different policies and plans that they come through. We have wonderful NAPs and NDCs. No doubt, I'm sure at some point, we'll also have something of a national profiling on loss and damage that will become a mandate that will be given to local countries, LDCs and SIDS, to have their own plans and things set up before you can get funding support from the FRLD. That is likely what happens in these sort of mechanisms, in these systems in the COP. But in the national sector, how are you addressing this? So the mechanism that was developed in Bangladesh, which took a little bit of institutional challenges, there was a lot of sort of discussions about what ministry hosts it, what agency hosts it, who has the jurisdiction, who has the power. There was a lot of discussions that happened in consultation with the government officials. It happened with different bodies of civil societies that are working on different aspects. We just heard some different impacts that are on livelihoods, that are on migration, that are on health, that are on housing. These are all dealt with by different sectors in the national context. So it was about bringing these different actors together, understanding what are their things that they need addressed immediately when a disaster happens, when an impact occurs, whether it's slow onset, whether it's rapid, what are the different things that need to be addressed, and a mechanism that takes it as a task, not trying to do everything all at once because the task is really big, but really trying to be strategic about what is the task that we're trying to address right now, who do we need to coordinate, and the mechanism does that sort of coordination. So this was something that started pre-pandemic. The institutional challenges, I'm sure, are not akin to different countries where everybody will have different government challenges of trying to set up a mechanism or a framework or do a policy or a plan in consultation. There are always these different interests about which ministry will take over, which agencies, which secretariat, where do we get the budget from? Do we use our national budget? Do we find outside funders? Do we find philanthropies? These are all conversations that need to be happening, but they don't need to stop you from addressing the impacts for the vulnerable communities, because they are still facing these challenges as we go on having these discussions. So again, one of the things that I would say as a hopeful for other countries that are looking at how to address the impacts in their own national context, in their own local context, don't wait for others. Find what you can do now. Find who's willing to work with you right now. If it's this ministry or if it's that government official, if it's that philanthropy, if it's that civil society actor, bring them around the table and figure out what you can do right now. And when other things fall into place, figure out how you can collaborate and engage with that then. Don't wait for everything to be good and then find and make your own mechanism happen at that time. And in Bangladesh, that's exactly what we did when the mechanism was set up, like I said, before the pandemic, even before there was any funding announced. Funding was taboo, not to be talked about in these corridors, but we knew that this is something that needs to be addressed, and this is something as a country that we are facing the impacts, and our communities need a way for us to be able to address them. Don't wait for other issues and initiatives to come forward. Do what you can where you can do it. That would be my message.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Saqib. And also, thank you for stopping at such a positive note, because sometimes it feels that we're so helpless, but I think your message is clear that impacts are not stopping, so something needs to happen. And I remember when the Loss and Damage Fund was being set up, there was a nice analogy that was being used, is that we don't need to build a perfect plane, but we need to have a bicycle that just starts going. And I think now it's evident that the fund is here, not perfect, yes, but it's here. So I think, yeah, small steps get us to where we want. Before we go into questions and maybe also comments or remarks from your side, we have Dr. Kira, who joined us back online. I think we stopped at a point in your presentation where you were speaking about the luxury goods. So if you would like to make a short input before we go into questions from the audience, please come in now.
Me well?
Yes, we hear you.
Great. I would like to just wrap up as it was interrupted, what I was trying to bring across at the end. So one issue is that we are justifying additional fossil fuel burning with the prospect of development and with the prospect of higher resilience. Whereas in fact, a lot of the additional emissions that we are releasing are accounted towards luxury goods, towards convenience, etc. And then I wanted to make a last remark, which I think is also very pertinent to the discussion as we've had it, as I've been following you in the last minutes here, which is that losses and damages need to be addressed, need to be prevented, and when they occur, they need to be accounted for in terms of financial support. Because if we do not do that, then we have a situation in which we are confronted with possibly more resource conflicts, with possibly more conflict constellations that are worsened by climate impacts and that are worsened by the losses and damages which are not accounted for. So I think tying this to the issues of economic and traditional security is pertinent. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I think there was so much interest in the audience earlier when you were presented, like when we were recording, we were showing the recording. So if you can stay also with us for 15 more minutes, if more questions come to you, that would be great. And now the floor is open for questions, remarks.
Hi. Hello. Hi. Okay.
Yes.
Hi. Good day to the panel. Congratulations to German Watch and Care team for putting this together. Kriston Herbert from MCAA/UNU EHS. I just wanted to follow up on a question that came up multiple times in terms of ensuring that these policies come from the bottom up and are not top-down policies as it relates to FRLD. How do you strengthen these mechanisms to ensure that the most vulnerable are impacted and that they're at the heart of the discourse? And this could be for anyone.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions or comments or your assessment of where we are now very shortly?
Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Toussaint from the African Futures Lab. A little bit in the direction of what Adriana said around the advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice. So we now have the world's top court spelling out what states should be doing to prevent climate harm. Do you see this narrative changing at all here in the negotiations? Do you expect that countries will listen? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We have an opportunity for one more intervention, please.
Thank you very much. This is Azmat Shahi, Start Network Pakistan. So my colleague Saqib mentioned, so since morning we have participated in different sessions. Of course, all the measures, they have been taken at national level, but at community level still, there is nothing have been done. So, my suggestions would be like, the community level experience should be in these sessions so we can learn and we can implement our region as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And since this was a short remark, I'll also give you a chance.
Thank you so much. My name is Faith Ngige from Kenya, and I think I would like to appreciate the connection between loss and damage and overshoot. I think that's a very good angle from a policy perspective to start positioning the discussion of loss and damage so that it's a bit different from adaptation, because sometimes there seems like to be very blurred angles when positioning exactly what it is that you're looking for. My question is, in the light of the adaptation indicators, the GG indicators that we anticipate to get from this scope, what are the opportunities either for loss and damage to really get a distinction from those indicators so that it's very clear as we move forward, because this session was about the way forward, and help us shape the conversation.
Right. Thank you very much. I think since we have 10 minutes left, I'll leave it now to the speakers to respond to the questions, but also I have a question for you. So I would like you to give like a very punchy, strong message that you want from this COP on loss and damage and also beyond Brazil. So each speaker now gets 2 minutes, so feel free to respond to the questions we got from the audience and also respond to my question, please. And I would like to start with Saqib.
Okay. Is it working? Thank you. So maybe touching upon a few of the questions together. So in terms of how to really synthesize local level and community level sort of responses, their initiatives, building that into policies, building that into initiatives that can actually be sustainable. So a lot of the work that we do through our partnership with German Watch and a number of other projects that we work with at the local level is really trying to develop local plans. So in Bangladesh, because we are such a cyclone-prone and flood-prone country, historically anyways, regardless without the impacts of climate change, it's just the geography that we're in. That's what happens. So our disaster ministry for many decades has already been doing a lot of localized community level disaster planning for cyclones in particular, because that's something that is historically one of the issues that they've been having to deal with. And in cyclone season, much like the typhoon season and hurricane season that we're hearing about in Jamaica and in Philippines, in our cyclone season, those communities and those committees are activated from the disaster ministry, working with local councils, working with city municipalities, district officials, and civil society. And again, it looks at it at a very siloed event-based. It's about this cyclone coming. It's a named storm. It's happening in the bay. It's coming in the next week. What do we need as a response now? And what will be the rehabilitation right after this? But they have a system and a process in place. They have ways of engaging millions of people to be evacuated into shelters, to be given food, to be given some sort of housing and support, and then brought back into some sort of their rehabilitated areas when feasible. And then after the season, it stops. So then again, it's not, for us, is not a siloed approach of trying to do these things when loss and damage happens, because for us really, thematically, what we see is loss and damage is on a continuum. You are resilient right now, you can be adaptive to this point. If you don't do any resilience and adaptation, you will have loss and damage impacts. And that continuum changes. I can do that assessment this year. There are studies and places that we've gone and done that sort of community work with local officials and local communities. What kind of impacts are you facing? What kind of policy help would you need? What type of support would you need? We do that year on year, but we have one very bad cyclone, one very bad flood, one very bad heat wave. This year, those are impacts and things that are loss and damage no longer adaptable. A cyclone will come and hit that same place that was a resilient community, a adaptable sort of district, a local official that was working, doing really good work on adaptation. Now it's an example of loss and damage. This is a continuum. This is not something that you pass. It's not a video game level that you achieve and go beyond, that you can't scale back. These are things that will constantly keep changing, and depending on how much mitigation, how many emissions we're actually being able to mitigate out, these impacts will get worse and they'll be more and more frequent. So again, these continuums need to be reviewed constantly. So you need to be constantly talking with these committees, having these community groups, these stakeholder mappings, these different activities that we do through workshops, through a lot of the work that we do in policy development, but not just leave it as a policy development, put it into practice at some point. So again, what we try to do is really take those sort of inputs from the local level, building them into the national processes, and then finding ways of how to plug it into these global places. So when these different committees at the Warsaw International Mechanism, at the Santiago Network, at the Fund for Responding for Loss and Damage, they open calls for sessions looking at community practices, community initiatives, local areas which are actually doing good work. We try and plug it in there, that these are good examples happening in this country, happening in Bangladesh, happening in Vanuatu, happening in Samoa. These are different initiatives that communities are already doing. You guys are behind. How can you tag into something like this? How can you use this as a pilot? And what are the ways that you can be more hopeful to the communities that are facing these impacts? So my message at the end of it would be, as I said, don't wait for others. Take the initiative yourself. There will be like-minded people that are finding ways to help you. If you take the initiative, others will follow.
Thanks a lot, Saqib. I think a clear and very doable key message. Just being mindful that our panelists online are in Germany and the time is very late, so I'll turn to them first to give their answers, and then we'll come back to the in-person panelists. So Dr. Kira, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this really interesting discussion so far. I would like to come in again on the question of overshoot. So what you have mentioned is exactly right from the audience. I think it's an important reference point that was also reconfirmed by the International Court of Justice in its advisory opinion on the obligations of state regarding climate change. So they recognize the 1.5-degree limit as the main target of the Paris Agreement. So this means that we should look at losses and damages that occur beyond this limit and start also arguing for higher input on excess emissions to make up for excess emissions that go beyond this limit, and therefore also higher payments that go towards the loss and damage fund, especially once this target is transgressed. And maybe leading over to Katharine, we should also connect this to the question of migration as adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I think the sound was not ideal, but I think the final message, especially on having migration as an adaptation strategy, is also a key message to take away. Now over to you, Catherine. Please come in.
Maybe only to make it brief, I think I'm very happy that we are bringing all those aspects together, because human mobility and these really different forms of human mobility with a different degree of compulsion and of force is so important when we talk about loss and damage. And I will also say it's a question of reparation. We have now a crucial moment, and if we have the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and that which is much more, which includes much more human mobility and displacement and the state's obligations. And I think that now with both decisions, also the advisory opinion and this from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, we do have a starting point also to say to say we have states have the obligation to protect migrants, but also to ensure that people can stay in dignity. And so I know that when I talk about human mobility, it's really technical, because we talk about how can we ensure that different people in different stages of human mobility can be protected from more loss and damage, and how they can reach also the money and have access to the funding. It's technical, but at the same time, it's just like a core issue. And I remember the study that La Ruta de Clima conducted in Central America, where they really talked with a lot of different communities. I have been to El Hierro, where people from Gambia and from Mali are arriving, where from 10 boats, only one arrives. Yeah, 9 ships, they drown and people die. So we are talking of amount of people that are dying in the Mediterranean, that are dying in the deserts of the Sahel, that are dying literally in the way to the US or through Central America. And I think that we have to put this very clear when we talk about loss and damage reparation and states' obligations. We are talking about really people dying, and this is a little bit pathetic, but I think it's really important to make this clear, and I will finish it with this. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you as well for reminding us of the human dignity dimension of it. Now, over to you, Marlene. And please keep it to 30 seconds because we're running out of time. Sorry.
Thank you. And maybe just to respond to the question around the indicators and loss and damage, for the global goal on adaptation, indicators are basically expected to, enhance adaptive capacity, reduce vulnerability, and build resilience. We, in the previous sessions of all the process of indicators, we used to have indicators that are not adaptation-focused indicators, and all of them were actually removed. So in the global frameworks that we hope to adopt, they are only focusing on adaptation indicators and not other from, Sendai or SDG and all that. That is the aim of the work that we've been working around the global goal on adaptation, basically. And I think it's very important to ensure that social protection does not come in just when the events or the loss and damage events occur, but they should start early, because then it's also cash efficient in terms of leveraging on the other already ongoing initiatives. It's very important to ensure that these initiatives support women and girls, ensure that the approaches are locally led, enhancing, building their capacity around the aspects of loss and damage, and ensuring the decision-making process, they are also part of that. And I think, finally, the loss and damage fund resources should be able to easily flow to the local level, easily accessible, and of course, it needs to be in form of grants and not loans. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marlene. And now, last but not least, Adrian, please.
It's okay? Yeah. So there's this testimony about a colleague from Honduras. And he said when the flood came, his house got destroyed. So he went with his wife to a shelter. And then everybody went back to their houses, but he had no house. And then he felt bad. So he went and built a little refuge with some branches. And then he promised himself that he will build a stronger house. And he did. So what does that tell us? It's not that there isn't loss and damage money, because that guy and his family paid the loss and damage, the cost of the economic development of big carbon economies. So that's where the money is. It is subsidized by those people. So it's not there isn't money. It's that people here, the negotiators, want to make profit about everything. And that's why the TFFF that the president is issuing now has $5-6 billion. Instead, the loss and damage has less than what it was placed, $780 million. So it's not that there is no money. It's that the poor pay for loss and damage and the wealthy make profit of about everything else. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And also for a very important point that people's suffering is not really a business case. It shouldn't be treated as such. With this, I would like to thank you all. I'd also like to thank our panelists. And finally, I also would like to thank my colleague, Magdalena, who prepared all of this event but was not able to join. And yeah, thanks a lot. Have a good day.
Global Machidão, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Billy.